When I was a kid, I fell in love with Wisconsin. It all started when my parents decided on a last-minute spring getaway to a cozy cabin that had belonged to my grandparents. I adored everything about it: the isolation, the vast meadows perfect for playing all day long. That cabin was my sanctuary, a magical place where everything seemed breathtakingly beautiful. At least it was until a few years ago. In 2019, after my partner and I had been together for 6 years, we finally got married. My parents surprised us by offering to sell us the cabin. Thrilled, we decided to spend our honeymoon there before settling back into our daily routines. Just days after the decision, my husband, Dan, and I were on a flight to our new home. As the rental car rumbled over the familiar gravel road leading to the cabin, the crunch of the stones beneath the tires stirred me from my nap. Dan whistled in awe at the sight of the sprawling land. "Wow, you weren't kidding. This place is incredible," he said. I chuckled. "When are you going to admit I'm always right?" Our playful teasing carried on as Dan parked the car. Before he even finished shutting off the engine, I was outside, breathing in the crisp air. "Hurry up, slowpoke. Our honeymoon awaits," I called out, dragging my suitcase up the stairs. Dan laughed, shaking his head. "Emily, you don't care about the honeymoon right now. You just want to soak up the nostalgia." Rolling my eyes, I snatched the keys from him. "Are you calling me old?" I teased, unlocking the door. Inside, the air was still and heavy with dust. Furniture sat hidden beneath protective sheets, untouched since my grandparents' passing in 2013. The sight filled me with a bittersweet mix of joy and melancholy. It still felt like home, though it clearly needed a good cleaning. The first few weeks at the cabin were blissful. We spent our days tidying up, reminiscing, and simply enjoying the peace. Midway through our honeymoon, we received unexpected but exciting news. I was pregnant. The baby wasn't planned, but we couldn't have been happier. One night, Dan offered to make the hour-long trip into town to satisfy my sudden cravings for salty chips and mint chocolate ice cream. Alone, I nestled under a blanket on the couch, the soft hum of the TV lulling me towards sleep. Then came the knocking. First, I thought it was part of the show, but as it grew louder, more insistent, I realized someone was at the door. My pulse quickened. It was late and we were miles from anyone. "Elena, let me in," a voice called. Sounded like Dan, but off. His usually warm voice was cold and raspy, carrying an edge that sent chills down my spine. I froze, unable to move or speak. The knocking stopped, replaced by a scraping sound. Claws raked against the outside walls, slowly moving toward the living room. My heart sank as I remembered. I hadn't closed the curtains. I could feel it nearing the window, could sense its gaze. Without thinking, I pulled the blanket over my head like a frightened child. "Top, top, top." A new voice, sinister and guttural, whispered, "I see you." Terror rooted me in place until I heard the familiar jingle of keys at the front door. Dan was home. Whatever was outside growled in frustration before it disappeared into the night. Dan's face fell when he saw my tear-streaked cheeks and trembling frame. He held me close, his presence a balm to my frayed nerves. We called the police, who found claw marks etched into the cabin's walls. My parents reassured us it was likely an animal, but I wasn't convinced. Despite my lingering fear, we moved in, installing security cameras, gates, and other precautions. Over the years, eerie incidents continued. Distant screeches in the woods, carcasses left near the house. But nothing could prepare us for what happened last month. Dan and I were now parents to 2 wonderful children, Sophia and Max. One evening, our friend Alex called, asking if one of us could cover a shift at the auto shop we worked at together. I volunteered, kissing Dan and the kids goodbye before heading out. Hours later, my phone rang. "Elena, "Where are you?" Dan's voice was frantic. "Still at work. What's wrong?" "You're outside." My blood ran cold. The thing was back. I left immediately, speeding home, dread mounting with every mile. When I arrived, the gate blocked my path. Dan stayed on the phone, urging me to stay in the car while he opened it from his side. But I could feel it watching me from the trees. A faint tapping started on my car window. My heart raced as I cranked the radio to drown out the sound. Then came a growl, deep and menacing, shaking me to my core. I couldn't take it anymore. Fueled by desperation and anger, I reversed my car, slamming into whatever was behind me. A blood-curdling scream echoed as I sped down the driveway. At the gas station where we regrouped, I clung to Dan and the kids, vowing to protect them. We left the cabin and haven't been back since. Through research, I've come to suspect the creature might have been a Wendigo or a skinwalker. Whatever it was, it turned our paradise into a nightmare we'll never forget. This story takes place in the forests of southern Oregon, where I grew up, a region that's seen many wildfires over the last few years. My brothers and I were heading out to our family's property to tend the garden there. We planned to stay up in the mountains for a week or so to escape the chaos of the city and spend some quality time together. We hadn't been particularly close growing up, so this was a chance to reconnect. At the time, I was 18, eager for some time away to shoot targets, drink some beers, and hopefully bond with my older brothers despite the age gaps between us. It was a Tuesday when we packed my brother's lifted Dodge Ram with supplies, guns, food, fishing gear, and plenty of whiskey and beer. After grabbing lunch, we set off for the property. The place was tucked away on a long dirt road that started as asphalt but quickly turned to gravel as it wound up the mountain. At the top, there was an old, weathered helicopter pad that always intrigued me, though I never figured out why it was there. About 40 minutes into our drive, we arrived at the garden. It was a small, peaceful haven deep in the forest. The property had a cozy cabin my brother built years ago, along with a few outbuildings for cooking, storage, and bathing. It was a slice of paradise where I could enjoy nature and feel completely free. The first few days were amazing. We tended the garden, shared drinks, and explored the old logging trails in the truck. On the fourth day, we had a visitor, an older neighbor whom we'll call Joe. Joe was a classic mountain man, gruff, independent, and fiercely private. He loved his solitude with his dogs and was always respectful of our space. Joe came by to give us a heads up about a mountain lion in the area. One of his dogs, an older one named Daisy, had recently been attacked, so he wanted us to stay vigilant. After Joe left, my brothers decided we should try hunting the mountain lion since one of them had a predator tag to fill. That night, we went to bed early, planning to head out before dawn. The next morning, around 3 a.m., my brothers were ready and waiting for me. I took a quick shower, sprayed my clothes with scent block, and grabbed my .308 rifle. With a mug of coffee and a cigarette, I joined them, eager for the adventure. My brothers, seasoned outdoorsmen, had been visiting this property for over a decade and knew the land like the backs of their hands. After an hour of slow hiking, we reached a natural spring that fed a small creek. The spring formed a shallow pool that served as a watering hole for local wildlife, especially during the dry summer months. We set up 2 blinds about 200 yards away, with the wind in our favor. It was a perfect spot to wait. As dawn broke, we quietly whispered about Joe and his dog while keeping an eye on the spring. Suddenly, a raccoon approached the pool but bolted in a panic, as though terrified. We exchanged confused glances, unsure what had scared it. Moments later, something emerged from the brush near the water. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It resembled a wolf, but its head was unnaturally large and square, almost like a massive pit bull. Its hind legs were oddly shaped, almost resembling those of a deer. We stared in silence, trying to make sense of what we were seeing. Then it looked directly at us. My oldest brother raised his .30-06 rifle immediately but didn't fire. I was baffled at how it spotted us. We hadn't made a sound and were positioned upwind, making it nearly impossible for it to detect us. Its mouth opened, emitting a high-pitched squeal that reminded me of nails on a chalkboard. I shouldered my rifle, heart pounding, ready to shoot. But before any of us could react, the creature let out an ear-piercing shriek, like a broken siren, and sprinted into the forest. We sat there in stunned silence before deciding to head back. On the way, my oldest brother revealed that he'd seen its teeth when it snarled at us. They were sharp, like those of a big cat or predator. Shaken, we stopped by Joe's place to tell him what had happened. Joe listened intently, then shared a chilling story. He told us he believed we had encountered something similar to what he'd seen years ago. A strange, deer-like creature that mimicked other animals but wasn't quite right. He called it a shapeshifter, something local native legends spoke of. Joe hadn't seen it in decades and thought it had long since disappeared, but now he was convinced it had returned. We left Joe's place with heavy minds, returning to the cabin. Though the rest of our stay was uneventful, I couldn't shake the fear of what we'd witnessed. That creature wasn't like anything in the natural world. So, if you're ever in the mountains near Maple Creek and hear an eerie shriek in the woods, be cautious. It might be the same thing we encountered. Hiking in the northern hills every year, my close friend Greg and I visit his grandparents at their cabin in a cozy, peaceful village nestled in the northern hills of Tennessee. Greg, his grandpa, and I are all outdoorsy types, so we always find exciting activities to do in the area. One evening, we decided to try a nighttime hike on a path not far from the cabin. Now, this wasn't your typical hiking trail. It was more like a dirt and gravel road that hunters, campers, and off-road bikers often used. As we arrived at the trailhead, we noticed an old, worn-out, black Jeep SUV parked near the entrance with two men in their 40s sitting inside. Even though the area is generally safe, shady individuals sometimes roam these remote woods. To avoid any trouble, we chose another trail about half a mile down the road. We drove about 60 feet into the second trail, parking out of sight from the main road, and set off on our hike. The hike started out great, but about a mile in, we heard a dog barking from what seemed like a few hundred feet away. The barking didn't stop, and we couldn't tell if the dog was loose or tied up. Worried it might approach or even attack us, we decided to turn back. As we got closer to the truck, about 1,000 feet away, we saw another vehicle parked behind Greg's grandpa's truck. The car's engine was running, and its headlights illuminated the trail. It was unsettling. Why would anyone park behind a random truck at 10 p.m. in such a secluded area? The trail's parking spot wasn't visible from the road, so they had to drive in to find it. We stood still for several minutes, trying to spot any movement, but the darkness and distance made it impossible to see clearly. Thankfully, a large tree next to the trail provided cover, so whoever was in the car couldn't see us either. Greg's grandpa pulled out some night vision binoculars we had brought along, but even those didn't reveal much. We decided to wait, hoping the car would leave. But after about 10 minutes, to our horror, it drove around the truck and started heading down the trail, toward us. Reacting quickly, we scrambled up a hill beside the trail and hid behind a fallen log. Moments later, the same beat-up black Jeep SUV we had seen earlier drove past the spot where we'd been standing just seconds before. The SUV's windows were rolled down, and it slowed as it passed, sending my heart racing. We were terrified the men would stop or, worse, get out and search for us. Fortunately, they kept going without stopping. Once the SUV disappeared from view, we dashed back to the truck jumped in, and sped away. While it may not sound as terrifying as other stories, it was one of the scariest experiences of our lives. To this day, we don't know what those men wanted. My guess is they were hiding something deeper in the woods and thought we were intruding. A lot could have gone wrong. What if they had arrived while we were at the truck? What if they slashed our tires? What if they had turned off their headlights and waited for us to return? If we'd been just a few seconds slower, we might have been spotted, and who knows what might have happened.